Okay, hi everyone. I'm Laura Polano. I am a professor in art and design and communication studies here at CAMBI, and I'm the interim director for the Center for Design. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the conversation series this fall. This is our second event. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the Center for Design before we get started. So the Center for Design is led by the founding director, Paolo Tubarelli. I'm the interim faculty director. Estefania Chilota is not here with us today, but she does a lot of the work around the center as associate director. She's involved in research and all of the events and activities. Julie Fargus is our communication specialist, and Kate Kim is our current co-op for the fall 2025. We are very regularly doing these conversation series events, but we also, for example, in the spring, have a longer event called Design Research Week that we're currently planning. And our goal for the center, and something we've talked about in our faculty meetings for the last couple of years at the center, are related to getting all CAMD-related departments more engaged with the field of design research and looking at the intersections between design and all of the fields and disciplines represented at CAMD. So this is just to give you an idea of the wide variety of events that we have been doing, but also to send the message that we're looking to engage more deeply with all of the departments within CAMD. There we go. Now it's okay. Now it's full screen. Okay, great. Okay, now, but it's not changing. Okay, the last event that we had last month with perspectives on design and money. That was moderated by Nathan Feld, and then today it gives me the great pleasure to introduce this event, Truth in the Age of Algorithms, moderated by Silke Renee Meyer. And I will turn it over to Silke for the introductions of the full panel. So,
thank you, Laura.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So yes, thank you for inviting me to moderate something that couldn't be more timely, I suppose. Like Truth in the Age of the Algorithm, like our panel is very, most of you know everybody. Associate professor at Art and Design, Jennifer Gradecki, also associate professor at the department. And John Wihbey, also an associate professor in journalism. I understand you just have a book out, so that's a lovely thing. Me too, by the way. Thank you. We should celebrate like just the two of us today. All right. I just kind of like perhaps to refresh our memory, like kind of go a little bit through like truth in the age of ... Because the problem that we have with technology and truth and also kind of extremism as forces like dates back all the way to the dawn of humankind. So like if you recall like in antiquity, I mean Plato was already kind of worried about like this moment of written language that there is no person speaking anymore to defend or explain what they are saying, and that the demagogue, of course, is like the potential death of democracy, which why he rejected democracy as something that inevitably leads into the catastrophe. I wonder what you would say today. So that's like that's antiquity, right? Then we have like the blood libels, like during the medieval times, like again the printing press, right? We didn't know what knowledge is anymore, what is truth. Like a pamphlet war, like the fight over attention over accuracy started already at this point. Then of course Hitler fascism, radio, television, right? You wouldn't be able to think about like the big lie of Hitler fascism without television and radio, probably even more so. I think the last campaign that was really interesting and special also was like a KGB operation called Infection, that kind of like plays that idea that like the HIV virus has been planted by American intelligence to kind of Like and they planted the news in some Indian publications, so like the global sort of laundering of like a bigger network, like that is still kind of alive until today, maybe a predecessor. So I mean, it is a thing that like whenever like new technology comes in, the lies are being produced with new technology, and the verification is still stuck in the old technology, which is precisely where we are right now. However, and that may or may not be maybe the topic of our discussion today, what's different? I mean, how is this specific iteration kind of functioning, perhaps in relation to social media? And is it actually something ontologically different? Is it just another iteration of technology that sucks and then it doesn't? Or is it actually kind of a game changer that will kind of produce a different world, fundamentally different from earlier iterations? And I would like to ask John if you would be so kind to kind of like give us a brief presentation of your research first, 5 to 10 minutes, I was told, and then Jennifer and Derek will also kind of give a brief presentation, and then we will all talk.
Thank you.
5 to 10 minutes.
5 to 10 minutes. Okay, I will try to be succinct. Thanks everyone for coming out. My name is John Wihbey, and I have for a long time tried to study the dynamics of mis and disinformation, along with a bunch of other stuff. But the most, I think, important project that I've tried to advance and work on, we call the ethics of content labeling. And so this was coming out of the pandemic when we saw lots of labels on pieces of information across social media platforms and other types of online platforms. And we basically asked the question, like, what's the efficacy? How could labels be made better? Does anyone pay attention? Do they have some kind of, do they result in reduction in false beliefs or sharing intent? And so we had a several-year project that actually involved, I think, something like 10 different students, 6 different faculty. It was through the Ethics Institute here at Northeastern. And we wrote we wrote a bunch of different papers, but the central paper argued that we should approach all of these problems from the perspective of what the philosophers, the folks over in the philosophy department, call social epistemology. And it's actually a whole discipline in philosophy which thinks about a basic truth of being human, which is that we actually don't learn that much by directly having a certain experience or book learning. Most of the stuff that we know is actually socially learned and sort of ambiently learned through our communities and our social ties online now. And there are people who think very rigorously about like how do we think about what that means for humans, and what does it mean for the kinds of communities that we would want to construct. And so we made a bunch of recommendations. We worked actually with industry, so both Meta and Twitter, God bless Twitter, now X, were part of this, and we presented to them. And I won't belabor like the methods and whatnot, but one of the things that we recommended was that they think more systematically about what we would call social epistemic goals. And so they asked, like, well, how would we measure this? Because you're a tech company, you want to measure it, and then you want to operationalize it, and then you want to make money. But so we came up with a kind of 4 or 5 part way of thinking about this. And one was, if you look at a given set of users online, are your algorithms and your labels, are they improving the ratio of posts containing verifiable information to misinformation? So that can be measured in a newsfeed. You could actually think about that. And you would have to, of course, define misinformation, and there are lots of problems there, but they have lots of working definitions in these companies, and you could think about the ratio. You could also you could judge whether users are better judges of genuine expertise on the topics. So better linking, liking, visiting, sharing kinds of behavior. You could look at that. Again, problematic definitions, but they do have working operational definitions inside the companies. And I would point out that, like, at various times, the large tech companies have actually increased what they call the information quality around elections. So they definitely have internally a sense of like what is good and what is not so good. They don't want to talk about it much, but they have those rankings if they want them. Improving how users curate their information environment. So for example, making better choices in who they follow, unfollow, block, or whatnot. And then making users seek out a wider range of viewpoints on topics under legitimate dispute. So those would be ways that if you were a very pro-social tech company with lots of users, you could actually measure something that we might recognize, kind of from first principles as like a genuine social epistemic goal-driven approach to labeling and using algorithms to do some good work. And I want to tee up Derek and Jennifer I want to pivot to them or to teeing up kind of what they're talking about by also now just going through a few things that I think of as like the deep paradoxes of this truth and age of algorithms and AI kind of space. So one is the AI saturation paradox. That's sort of how I'm referring to it, which is that platforms are simultaneously now offering all of these AI creator tools. You see them everywhere. You see them YouTube and Meta and X and whatnot. But they're also, notionally, at least the pro-social companies are warning users about AI generated manipulation and deep fakes. So there's this contradictory environment going on where we're sort of encouraging the use of generative AI and then warning about AI. And so there's this sort of kind of topsy-turvy cognitive dissonance or whiplash. The other is the trust paradox, sort of in action. So research shows that users report not trusting AI. So all the survey work that we've done shows that there's a lot of distrust or mistrust or apprehension or anxiety, and yet people are using the technologies like crazy. And so there's a contradiction there as well. There is a transparency paradox as well, which is as you provide labels, AI, generated AI info as Meta's using, to their credit, they actually came to my AI class, the AI Meta policy team, and talked about their policy with my graduate students, which is pretty neat. But there are, I think, some deep contradictions in a lot of what the companies are doing. So, there's always been this worry in the corrections literature, correcting misinformation literature about backfire effects. Like if we call out bad stuff, or we just bring more attention to it, and then do people forget and they don't remember, the moon is made of cheese, and then someone says the moon is not made of cheese, and then 3 weeks later you're like, was the moon made of cheese? I'm not really sure. So there's this whole 10-year debate. Essentially what the social scientists have found is that like the backfire effect isn't that real, but it is real in certain contexts and sort of it's nuanced, but we shouldn't worry about it too much. But transparency has this paradoxical dimension. There's also, a couple more, and then I'll hand it over. What is the implied truth effect? So content labeling strategies designed to flag misinformation can create false impressions because the unlabeled content, the stuff that doesn't seem to have any treatment, now has this implied truth dimension to it. People have studied this. Again, the research literature is a little mixed, but it's another one of these kind of paradoxes that are operating. And there's also the liar's dividend, right? Which is sort of if we tell people to be super vigilant and on guard against like all AI generated fake stuff, we suddenly start to doubt all of reality. I don't know how many of you are still on X or lurking around X, but I mean, I sort of stayed on, and it is like a hall of mirrors sometimes. You are just not sure, are these images, are these people speaking, are these real, are these bots, all the social trace data, like, oh, this seems to have a ton of approval, but like, is that approval bot driven, or is this all like, is it AI all the way down? Is it AI all the way up? Is it AI sideways? I think some big questions there. And ultimately, I'll end here. I think if just in an ideal sense, if we wanted to sort of really think about these online environments and the how we would measure things within them. I think there are kind of three sort of social scientific tools that could be used. One is there's a theory running back a couple decades now called the technology acceptance model. It's been modified, TAM is the shorthand, but it is really about how technologies embody convenience and functionality. We sort of study them in terms of their perceived usefulness, the ease of use, and the trust in them. So I think there's actually that kind of theory could be very helpful as we try to study this. The other is just learning science, a cognitive science. I think there's a lot to be gained from thinking about users as learners, and as we engage in platform. I mean, we're doing it 6 or 10 hours a day or whatever the average is now. As we do that, like what are the ways in which we're acquiring information and coding information in the brain? What are the ways in which we're able to then regurgitate it or apply it? And then finally, just back to the beginning, social epistemology theory. How are the communities in which we are engaging helping us or hurting us in terms of acquiring verifiable information and truth? With that,
Perfect. Thank you. I suppose we just take all presentations first and then kind of do a discussion together, right? Yes.
So, yeah, so, yeah. You want to start?
Oh, yeah, so I just wanted to thank everyone for organizing this, Julie and Estefania, who might be online. Zilka for taking the time to be here and thinking of all these helpful questions that was actually helpful to us in preparing. And John also for taking the time to be here and have this discussion. I'm really excited to hear your thoughts, especially when we move into the Q&A. And for hosting us here, Laura, thank you so much.
Yeah, so, yeah, a lot of you might already be familiar with our work, but this is our unofficial, semi-official tagline. Technocrats find solutions to problems, we problematize their solutions. This actually came out of a conversation with our friend and mentor, Steve Kurtz of Critical Art Ensemble. So we're going to start using it. But our process involves reverse engineering technologies to reveal the underlying assumptions and problems that can arise through their implementation. And we use methods from media theory, science and technology studies, and critical theory to facilitate an engagement during the development of a project. So we're trying to quickly engage with the technology as we're building something. And this means asking questions about power differentials, financial incentives, and what new behaviors could arise when a technology is introduced into an existing socio-political situation. So our projects tend to focus on technologies that are used for social control or have a significant social impact, including open source surveillance systems, financial technologies, neural networks. And this is why we were early adopters of AI in our media practice and research. We wanted to really critically engage with the development of the technology as it was emerging. And so the definition of disinformation that we found to be useful comes from the paper Disinformation Echo Chambers. Disinformation circulates on social media through identity-driven controversies. The reason why this definition has been the most useful is because it allows disinformation to include factual information and that's presented outside of its original context so that it can be weaponized. A lot of disinformation that we found during our research that had a significant impact in the world was either information that was understood to be true, but was being presented to support an ideological position, or it was a value-laden judgment that couldn't be proved true or false either way. And so this type of information is very difficult to debunk because it involves critical thinking on the part of the person receiving the disinformation. And so our two most recent projects, Epic Sock Puppet Theater and Generative Persuasion, both directly deal with disinformation, and both projects are interactive. Epic Sock Puppet Theater uses animatronic sock puppets to present viewers with disinformation that was used in actual online social media campaigns in a playful manner where viewers can reflect on what they're seeing and hearing, rather than just react to it. And generative persuasion allows viewers to use generative AI to create disinformation that targets specific political orientations and personality traits. So our knowledge on these topics is coming out of the research phase for both of these projects. So for Epic Sock Puppet Theater, we combined disinformation data sets from a variety of sources. The largest source was from the Russian Internet Research Agency's disinformation campaign in the US around 2016, which was released as part of the Mueller report. But we've added and are continuing to add other sources as well. One of our biggest challenges here has been being able to verify that a social media account was actually a sock puppet and not just someone with the same ideology contributing to the conversation.
Yeah, and so our project generative persuasion came out of research into how generative AI can be used in disinformation campaigns and how it is being used. In August of 2024, you may remember OpenAI put out a report and they said that they had actually disrupted over 20 disinformation operations using ChatGPT. And they were mostly state actors trying to intervene in democratic elections. So this has direct implications for democracy. And to give two examples, there was an Iranian influence operation that generated content about the US presidential election. You can see it in the two examples in the top right of the slide. And then there were Rwandan accounts generating partisan tweets ahead of the country's elections. And if you look at this top right image, I think this is a great example of disinformation campaign tactics because they're using both sides of an argument to polarize people even further. We saw the same tactic with the Russian Internet Research Agency, this polarize and divide tactic. And these campaigns were often noticed because of mistakes. That was one of the main reasons why OpenAI was able to report on these. And you can see an example of this in the image on the bottom. This actually features the output, the very beginning part of what the AI said, which is, yes, I can create this for you. And it actually reveals that it was AI generated. So this is, at this point, easy to find. It's becoming, of course, more difficult to find the more effective people are at using it. And based on our analysis on the socio-technical situation that is surrounding AI generated disinformation, we've developed, of course, a lot of criticisms of different technological solutions. So some of the existing technological solutions include, stopping disinformation from being posted in the first place. That's kind of the first step. And of course, John already mentioned this, labeling disinformation, which is sometimes referred to as negative labeling, deplatforming people or demonetizing accounts. These are other techniques. Of course, one of the main criticisms of this approach is that it's undemocratic to remove people or shadow ban people or not allow them to communicate. And of course, this information can still spread because if there is disinformation that's already there that hasn't been found, that hasn't really dealt with the second half of the problem. So dealing with disinformation spreading, there's solutions including fact checking and content provenance authentication. But provenance authentication can be hacked, as we're going to talk about in just a couple of minutes here. And here it's really important to keep in mind that rebuttals actually need to spring from familiar epistemologies. I think we're going to have a lot of interesting overlaps in what we're talking about. One way to think about this is you can't fact check belief. That is just not going to work well with that kind of a paradigm. And different groups are going to trust different authorities. So not everyone is going to trust big tech to authenticate information, or journalists even to fact check. As we've seen, there's a lot of polarization, and I'll show some examples on the next slide. But overall, we would like to argue that because the targeted advertising business model promotes sensational content to keep people online, to hold their attention, if that isn't changed, these solutions are only going to be minimally effective. So that to me is like a huge shift that really needs to happen. So going back to the article that we referenced earlier for our definition of disinformation that we really have found to be very useful in relation to, the content analysis. This is Diaz, Ruiz, and Nilsson. They conducted a content analysis of YouTube videos that were spreading conspiracies about the flat Earth. And I think this one case study can actually be really helpful for us thinking about possible solutions moving forward. So they found 3 different echo chambers promoting the flat earth conspiracy. And each echo chamber had a different epistemological approach and then a different identity controversy as they refer to it. So one group of flat earthers felt that Bible verses were evidence. This was the only thing that they really valued epistemologically. And then this set up a polarizing logic between Christians and non-Christians. So there has to, in these cases, they found there's an in-group and an out-group and then a polarization that happens between them. And you can see this in every one of these echo chambers. Another echo chamber, I can talk, trusted only personal experiences. And they referred to this as a type of very, simple rudimentary experimentation, right? So the earth doesn't appear to be flat. I don't feel like I'm spinning. And then this sets up an in-group and out-group of the public versus the intellectual, which I think is kind of a big issue that is coming up right now. And then the third group is the conspiracy theorists, which in some ways are, some of the more interesting dimensions to this, who felt that powerful people are conspiring to hide information and, people can connect the dots and reveal hidden truths. And of course, there's the character of the uncompromising truth teller pitted against journalists, scientists, and politicians. And with this, I think overall, we need to keep in mind the fact that people are going to trust some epistemological approaches, but not others. And then echo chambers actually amplify these divisions. So this is part of the socio-technical context that we are working in. So then to go into more details about exploits for content authentication, provenance can be hacked via either hardware or software. And for the hardware part of it, it's as simple as retaking a photo on top of another photo with a lens cap on, or in terms of software, you can use a simple Python script to scrape metadata. So technological solutions have exploits.
So there's been a push within industry for technological solutions to distinguish truth from non-truth. One example is the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, which introduced a C2PA badging system for disinformation, which in their words is a technical standard to establish the origin and edits of digital content. The badge relies on a metadata block. The problem with this is it can easily be modified. The coalition was founded by Adobe, the New York Times, and Twitter in 2019, which at the time, all of them were companies that have financial incentive to be able to quickly distinguish between real and AI-generated content. But some cybersecurity professionals have pointed out that technical solutions like the C2PA could actually be counterproductive by giving people a false sense of security. It functions, they said that it functions as an honesty badge in an ecosystem dominated by bad actors who have no incentive to play by the rules. So that you can imagine the Russian Internet Research Agency, they're not going to adhere to a voluntary standard that can easily be circumvented. And Nikon, just a couple weeks ago, revoked its C2PA image authenticity certificates after the vulnerability that Jennifer just mentioned was exposed. But in terms of epistemology, this type of solution is an interesting shift from the empirical to metadata as the epistemological foundation for whether or not something is true or not. And so the projects that we've been working on have been doing this type of reverse engineering of truth. So gender persuasion addresses the political and financial incentives for producing AI-generated disinformation. It's a corporate fiction based on research into current and past practices.
Yeah, and so while the project is a corporate fiction, it is not speculative. It's based on the current uses and capabilities of generative AI and past and present uses of psychometrics in political and disinformation campaigns. It's not a prediction about how this technology could develop. It's a demonstration of how AI is currently integrated into PSYOPs campaigns and influence operations by militaries, commercial firms, and non-state actors to rapidly generate plausible content designed to target specific individuals and groups. And after we released our project, we found this RAND article that they had released where they attempted to reverse engineer, just like we did, how generative AI could be used to quickly create disinformation campaigns. And they literally came up with the same exact solution that we did using LM Studio to run these models locally. And we're going to go into some details about how we did that, just so you can see kind of behind the scenes. And the funny thing was they said this could be done for under $100,000, and we did it for the cost of a Mac Mini. So it's actually much more accessible than they're arguing. Part of our project is a fictional startup that we're continuing to develop, and it's a reference to the legacy of Cambridge Analytica, the British consulting firm that used 5-factor personality quizzes to correlate social media activity with personality traits to psychographically micro-target the public during the 2016 Brexit and Trump campaigns.
So part of the project is we've been creating these promotional videos that are intended to inform viewers of the capabilities of these technologies. And we're intentionally mimicking the presentation style of companies like Palantir, Cambridge Analytica, or Andrew, who they openly brag about their ability to manipulate political controversies and undermine democratic elections. Because the last place we exhibited this project was in Europe, most of our visual examples are coming from that context, like the narrative that Ukraine is selling weapons provided by the EU and the US on the black market. But disinformation content is generally more impactful when it supports a narrative that's currently out there rather than trying to invent a new narrative and push it. You need to have a lot of support work to make it seem like there's a community that's coalescing around that narrative.
So our project is presented in a military style portable computing case to really underscore the fact that it's a weaponized LLM. And as I mentioned before, the app uses a locally hosted LLM, and we were very easily able to remove the guardrails from that model to make it do whatever we wanted. And here you can see the back end. The program that we developed is using LM Studio, which you may already be familiar with. It's a desktop app that allows you to run a large language model locally. It has a chat interface. You can load different models like DeepSeek. And we've been using Meta Llama 3 Instruct for the model so far. And it was created by Meta, so we can assume that it was trained on troves of social media data. So it's really good at producing social media content. And eventually we're going to try to fine tune a model by training it on disinformation coming up. And in LM Studio, we're using system prompts. This is the simple way of getting it off the rails. It sets the overall context, behavior, and you could say persona for the responses. It's basically this foundational set of instructions that guides the model's behavior. It's often invisible to the end user, but again, it was very easy for us to generate disinformation, so it would not say, I can't help you. And in this example, we're targeting a person who's liberal, agreeable, and we're making a social media post. What we're doing is different, but conceptually similar to a jailbreak prompt, which you may have heard of, which would happen if you're engaging with a service and can only interface with the front end via the conversation that you're having with it, but you can see some similarities here. So it bypasses content filtering and safety measures. You can get the model to produce unverified information, false information, harmful or inappropriate content this way. It's do anything now is one of the main ways of doing that. Here's an example of disinformation that was made by our system. It's a social media post targeting open-minded liberals on the topic of climate change. So you can see for yourself how effective you think this is. I think it's especially helpful to analyze this text and see, are there any ways in which you could tell it was AI generated? Usually when I show this to people, they haven't been able to find any ways in which it seems fake. So in our app, the way it works is participants select their target audience's political orientation. At this point, it's just liberal and conservative. Select the type of content they want to have the algorithm generate. So it could be a conspiracy theory, political ad, or a social media post. And then they select the personality characteristic that they want to target from the Ocean profile: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, or neuroticism. And then optionally, they can enter a topic if there's something in particular that they want to
focus on.
Yeah, so we're also in the process of incorporating image and video generation into the workflow. So as you generate disinformation content, it'll create some sort of visual that will go along with it. And for this, we've just been using Stable Diffusion. It has an active community of contributors and many open source models available, including several different processes for face replacement to make deepfake images and videos. This is one we did several months ago. We've actually got some now that are a lot better than this even. And we're also continuing to develop the app so people can see how fake social media accounts, also known as sock puppets, can be used to spread AI generated disinformation. This is an approach that's been used by Team Jorge, an Israeli contractor known for producing social media disinformation campaigns that spread through sock puppet accounts. We should mention that our app is not and will not be made available online so that people can't actually use this to make a disinformation campaign. But we are developing the installation to mimic a corporate trade show display, and that's going to be happening this winter.
Thank you.
You done?
Yes.
Oh my God. Whoa. Well, I mean. I really would love if you would ask questions. So anytime, any moment, like after the two presentations, any thoughts, questions, comments. People?
I would say that amazing projects and an amazing discussion. Thank you very much. I was, struck by this kind of basic starting point of social epistemology, which in a way I think, and I think you also alluded to it, assumes a shared ontology, so that we can only talk about true and false if the moon is made of cheese, if we mean something related when we talk about the moon. And but now, if you look at labeling practices, maybe beyond misinformation, but more generally in AI, that shared ontology no longer exists. And in my recent work, I looked at how machine learning experts look at ground truth, and they have completely different understandings that are completely, like some would say, okay, we look for the best available information. The others say, whatever the labelers label is ground truth. And then yet others look for productively using the contradictions that the label, among the labelers. So I'm curious, like, how do you see that a situation where questions of true and false don't always apply across all topics, but
So what we find really interesting about it, like coming at it from as artists and media creators, is I always use the example it's actually from Follow the News, where when photography was first developed, it was considered to be a scientific apparatus, right? Like here's a record of truth, that's empirical evidence of the situation, something that happened. And so what we're really interested in is how technology is transforming this, and the idea of like content labeling or some sort of algorithmic process that can distinguish truth from not truth. How does that impact the way people react to what they're experiencing? But yeah, in terms of like actually having a shared ontology, that's also being impacted by all of the various filter bubbles and the ability of people to choose their own orientation towards a worldview or something.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, like I said before, I do think that without changing the targeted advertising business model, I don't know how we can get people out of these echo chambers to see other ways of thinking, other ontologies, other epistemologies as potentially valuable and open up to those, because I think that it's potentially also a process of developing empathy and perspectivalism. And I actually was wondering to kind of connect it to what you were saying. You mentioned earlier that some of the tech companies that you've been working with were trying to, I don't know if it was encourage or promote people to seek other viewpoints. And I was wondering, how are they doing that? And that seems like it could be really helpful and relevant in relation to this notion of ground truth and.
Yeah, I mean, there are models where you just feed them conflicting information and the model will figure out that those actually represent different perspectives.
So this
So
is
you don't
something
have
that,
to label this in the beginning.
gotcha, that makes sense, because it's happening through machine learning, yeah. Yeah, I'm just curious to know too, like what are these companies doing to?
So, and to be
promote that?
clear, that that was a recommendation that we had,
Gotcha,
yeah,
okay.
which is a way
This
of,
is
it's a
more
metric,
cutting
yeah,
edge,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And, you know, the political science community talks about sort of cross-cutting information.
Yeah,
Things that, you know, either are left or right coded. And there's a lot of research that suggests that actually feeding people politically cross-cutting information actually can polarize them more in a certain
Oh,
direction, and
interesting.
can reinforce.
Yeah,
I mean, again, mixed results, it's complicated, it's contextual, but, you know, a few things that are probably worth thinking about. One is, we should probably first remind ourselves that most of the advertising and persuasion literature says that you need lots of exposure to messages before there's like substantial belief change. This is not always true. And if it's election day and they're 3 minutes before you're about to vote in Romania or Slovakia, that may be a different situation. But for the most part, we know that persuasive messaging takes like lots of TV advertising, which is why people spend millions of dollars to repeat things. And so, you know, we should, the hypodermic needle model, where just somebody injects a message into your head immediately from social media and you just believe it, is just not, it's a fallacy. So we have to,
right.
you know, there's a lot there to unpack, but but Dietmar, to your point about machine learning and how people see truth in different ways, and particularly has kind of computer science has a different conception sometimes than I think we might in the humanities and the social sciences, and that's completely true. And bridging that divide might be the question of the age in some ways. And I'd be really interested to know more about your research. I think if okay, so you don't believe in climate change, but do you believe that the internal combustion engine in your truck works? Right? There are often like ways in which I think the broad ideological debates online like have to hit human reality as like grounded beings in experience. And so sometimes I wonder if you know, what that disconnect is between people being performative online and saying, you know, going and owning the libs or whatever it is, and then actually in practice in their everyday experience, actually living in a grounded reality in a sort of truth space. And I sometimes wonder if we're just missing a lot because we, the way we're understanding polarization and a lot of things these days is through just the massive amounts of digital trace data and content. But in fact, people may be functionally more grounded in truth in their everyday life. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I do think there's something very important there that we need to consider.
Yeah, I have something that it makes me think of this idea of the kernel of truth. There was a tactical media group from Italy, Wooming, that they like to use this term to talk about why conspiracy theories are impactful and why people believe them. And I think approaching it that way and thinking about the way in which there is something behind it that is meaningful and valuable and people are truly trying to understand the world can actually help us to kind of cut across those differences. And you really could apply this to any example of a conspiracy theory. So, you know, with QAnon, one of the like hashtags that they were trying to appropriate was Save the Children. Of course, you know, people are concerned about their children. They want them to have, you know, society taking care of them in various ways and not have to worry about powerful people exploiting them. And like, that's something we can kind of all empathize with. So I think this notion of like, where is the kernel of truth, even in something as wild as a conspiracy theory, could help us to understand why people might take these ideas up and how they might be useful when they're trying to understand the world.
I mean, I wonder, well, I kind of just insert myself now, but like, I think the matter of truth has become like obviously a term that like is astonishing because like 10 years ago, nobody of us probably would have stated that there is such a thing as truth. Like that's, I mean, like the whole postmodern discourse was like very clear on the subjectivity, etc. And the subjectivity that informs everybody's truth. So now suddenly we have a truth, I don't even know where it's coming from. And my suspicion also that what you call like the paradox of truth, and I don't trust it, but I use it. I think that's probably maybe question like I want to believe that this is true because it gives me affirmation and it gives me pleasure. So affirmation and pleasure is what I care about, truth is what I don't care about. So maybe we spend too much time like thinking about how to verify what is true or not true, notwithstanding the question of what is true and what is not true. But like the need to receive a narrative, yeah, that justifies my action.
It reminds me of something a student said to me this semester. It was maybe just a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about misinformation and disinformation as a topic in class. And they were saying one of the reasons why they felt that echo chambers were so powerful or filter bubbles is that it feels good to be confirmed that you are right in something.
Yes.
And I thought that was a really profound point,
Yeah.
that it is about, I think
Yes.
that resonates with people, that it is about how it feels to be right rather than whether you are or
Yeah.
not objectively. If we can even use that word, I don't know how postmodern you want to get. But yeah, no, that's
Especially as a species that has been groomed to be the best, the smartest, the fastest, and now suddenly being humiliated by not knowing, I guess to feel I'm right, you know, is just priceless, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth saying that the things that we focus on in terms of like truth online are often the big headline type of things, like who won the 2020 election, right? Where there's a very binary sort of choices, right? Or is anthropogenic climate change real? Or measure that, and we have scientific consensus. Or what's another good? You know, these like really stark binaries. The reality is that like most of life is just super messy. And rumors are just a part of human communities. And in fact, most claims online are like kind of true and kind of not true, or like the truth is emerging and it's not quite yet determined. And you know, there's a whole like academic study now of rumors online. Kate Starbird at University of Washington's been doing terrific work, and there are a lot of others as well. And it's clear that rumors are just as important to us almost as like food, right? Because it's like, they're very important in terms of orienting us in our environment, in our world, in our community, in our tribe. And so I think we should be really circumspect about thinking that there would be any kind of like, you know, big solution to this problem of truth online. I think it's always gonna be shades of gray. One of the things I've written about recently is some of the internal workings of the tech companies to try to use probability as a tool. We're kind of in we're now in shades of permanent probabilistic gray with this misinformation and truth stuff. And so, you know, there's Meta at one point was using like, well, if there's a 90% probability that this is harmful or you know, then we will deprecate it 10% in the downranking algorithm. And there's some amount of sophistication around this stuff, and different experiments have been tried. I don't know if that's like what they're doing regularly. I couldn't really figure that out, but anyway, just some thoughts.
Yeah, so question for y'all. I'm Dan Jackson. I teach at the law school. We're very interested in the truth, so I'm super happy to see this, and especially excited to be here. And you know, in a court of law, evidence has to be admitted by a judge. Before you can get a piece of evidence or somebody to testify about, or a photograph or a video or what have you, the judge has to say, yes, this is sufficiently reliable for me to give it to a jury so that they can assess whether or not this particular fact happened, right? So 30 years, if I was on trial for assaulting John, and 30 years, and I would never do that to you. But if 30 years ago, there was a photograph of me doing that, it would have been a very straightforward approach for judges to say, okay, this is a photograph, I'm gonna call the photographer in, I'm going to have the attorneys direct and cross-examine the photographer. Did you take this photograph? Yes. Where did you get it developed? And then bring in the person who had the photograph developed, all that to establish the reliability. And of course, with the rise of artificial intelligence generated images, video, audio, you name it, getting more and more difficult for us to be able to do that.
Yeah.
As long as judges can look under the hood of the technology, it's a pretty safe bet that they'll be able to assess whether or not the generated image is real or not. How close are we, do you think, to the point where we can no longer look under the hood?
It is an arms race. I think that's a good word to describe how quickly it's being developed. And we're working at the cutting edge of what can be done with images, sound, and video. And it's amazing how fast that is progressing. And I think this is actually a place where I think artists can contribute to this discussion. And Derek was already kind of alluding to this. When artists started using photography, they started to raise questions about what data is and what empirical truth is. And I think we can try to do that with generative AI. It's funny because we started working with AI generated images in 2020 during the pandemic. And then we were thinking about misinformation and scientific uncertainty and kind of dealing with that. And it was so easy to tell when something was AI generated. It looked terrible. Either the patterning was clear, and now.
The famous Will Smith spaghetti video, was that?
Oh, I don't know. I don't remember that
Sorry.
one. Yeah, there's a lot of.
Yeah.
You'll have to send that to me.
Okay, I'll do it.
But it's so, one of the things I do when we go around and we're doing workshops on generative AI is continually update the images that we're using and see if people can tell the difference. And right now you can still tell. There are giveaways, but there are LoRa's that are
With
being.
some of them.
Yeah, but there are LoRa's being developed where you can make sure that it has all the right number of fingers and you can add grit and texture. It's just becoming more and more realistic and imperfect looking enough that it can easily fool your eye. There's also tech companies, I don't know if you want to go into this, that are trying to use AI to figure out, if something is AI generated.
So from like a technical perspective, some of the things you're doing is there, obviously like metadata, but what happens if you take an AI generated image and feed it through a camera?
Right.
Totally, but reset that. They're looking at like the physics of certain things, like how the light's falling, could that actually happen or not? AI generated images, it's all based on probability. They're not looking at like what is the actual trajectory of the light and that, or how gravity is working. But this can be fixed through what they call control nets, where you take an image that already exists and you use that as the underlying structure for an AI generated image. And so it takes a little bit more work, but I would say if you really wanted to produce a false image that is 100% convincing, the technology exists today to do it. And within probably a year, maybe even less, it'll be accessible to a lot of different people. Maybe not everyone, but it's on its way.
And to be clear, that the ability to create false evidence has existed for centuries.
Yes.
And so courts have become very adept, judges, and the entire law of evidence is, it's all about calling the false from the true, if you will, right? Use that word, right?
Yeah.
It's just a matter of modifying the inquiries. And I guess one of the concerns that we have in the law is that we're going to get to the place where you can't actually do that. You can't, if a fake image from 20 years ago, a good lawyer would have been able to cross-examine that image and say, and demonstrate to the jury that the angle of the sunlight is not matching the shadows. It's a fake photograph, right? Or been able to convince the judge that it's a fake photograph and therefore it doesn't get into evidence. And now we're getting to the place where that is just no longer the case. You no longer can make those inquiries. And we may get to the place where certain courts start eliminating entirely video, audio, photographic evidence, where they will only take first person testimony, which is, I'm not sure where that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it leads us into a place of more another version, maybe a different version of postmodern skepticism, where we really do need to approach everything, critically. And this is where I think literacies really come into play. And I wish that that could be more of a focus and that we could focus our educational system, especially, primary and secondary school, on making sure that everyone has those literacies so that they can make these decisions.
And this is one of the concerns with, algorithmic tools is, your math skills start to degrade the more you use a calculator, you don't really need them, right? And this is happening now with our critical thinking skills, because we're offloading a lot of the work, do I believe this or I don't believe this to an algorithm or some sort of like counting procedure, well as verified to that. And I think that's super dangerous. Like if you're thinking about like the idea of like a multiplicity of truths, like if you're gonna think about like what postmodern philosophers were actually saying about that, I think that a lot of what's happening is sort of this like technological emergence of a new grand narrative. Coming from positivism too. So it's like almost like a modernism 2.0 or something like that.
I have one question. Maybe take that question. Okay, in the chat also, then maybe Allied and like you wanna also read the question and maybe we can pull that. Allied, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, I'm Allied. I'm a PhD student in Cambridge. We talk a lot about disinformation and how Gen AI has really accelerated that. And I'm just curious sort of what the uses are in terms of, you said in the beginning, technocrats have to create their problems to solutions. And so how is Gen AI a solution and what was the problem?
Oh, okay, so what we were actually, or the way that I was framing it is the problem is disinformation, and then the technological solutions are being applied to the problem of disinformation. You could argue that content recommendation algorithms have been part of the problem of disinformation. And now generative AI is actually just speeding up the process of producing more disinformation. So yeah, I don't know if you want to add to that, but that's how I'm framing it, if that helps to clarify.
It's from the cybersecurity community all the way to the people who are worried about trust and safety and content moderation. There's a huge debate about whether generative AI will favor offense or defense. And it seems right now that offense, those who would want to be disinformers or misinformers or hate speech propagandists or whatever are sort of winning. There is a question about, and there are a bunch of startups out there that are trying to figure out whether new kinds of AI empowered systems and software could put human moderators in better positions to make judgments. And I'm not naive. You can imagine the tech companies just like using it to cut corners too. But I think there is like a genuine debate. One thing I just want to throw out there, it sort of relates to your question, but not entirely. But this is especially for the students. I teach an AI course right now, and I'm really interested in how young people are perceiving, like, have you seen Nano Banana or Sora 2 or VO3 or like any of these Gen AI photorealistic engines that are producing visual content? They're just absolutely flooding like your backyard, which is TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and whatnot. And this notion that like there's this slop or this sort of pollution in your information spaces which you care about. And like, if we take the very long view, just generationally, I wonder how the rising Alpha Z generation is going to ultimately see these technologies as they, I think in some ways, really overwhelm what were like really near and dear informational backyard environments. And I wonder if there will be a kind of backlash or a reset or some kind of rethinking of how we're doing all of this. Just one more point. The media forms that we choose to value, for example, short form video, TikTok, right, which Reels and Shorts and whatnot have all replicated. These have essentially no way of doing attribution or for verification, like within them, because it's super short, it's super potent, it's like, it's a vibe, it's a take, and then it's gone. And we've decided as a culture to value a media form that like doesn't really allow for like a link or a citation or any kind of like, I mean, there are ways obviously to do that, but
Or complexity, as we were talking about
complexity, right?
before.
And so I wonder if that has to change too as we move along, and I wonder if the rising generation is going to start to recognize that maybe we've gotten down to the very atomic unit of media, which is, a 7-second, video, and maybe that has to change, but anyway, I'll just throw it out there as a provocation.
Let's take one question on the chat and then we might.
I don't know if either of you want to read along, but someone said, we have a question about the ethics in training with existing artworks. They think authorship can support a healthy community through creativity, and they were wondering how algorithms can be used in facilitating that community. In addition, how can machine learning algorithms protect safe content for training that preserves? It's a very long message, but
Yeah, we recently heard from Adobe. We were at an AI summit and they were talking about how they don't use any artwork that hasn't been approved to be used in the training of their models. So there are some companies that are starting to at least do that. So we will be able to have choices in terms of what models we use. And so that is one positive development in that area, because it is a huge concern. Not only copyright, but I mean, this is potentially replacing so many people's livelihoods that this is a really big concern. I'm glad that somebody brought this up in the chat. This is another, I think, really important topic to discuss in relation to AI.
Yeah, but I think in terms of like artworks and authorship, I mean, artists have been copying other artists for centuries. That used to be how you would learn. And so I'm not sure where we go from here, but my guess is that our current laws surrounding copyright are behind the technology at this point.
Confirmed.
And there needs to be, it's interesting that I find so many artists like arguing to like, we gotta keep this like legal structure that like didn't do very much for us to begin with. And maybe why don't we replace it with like, if you generate new content that you just get paid for it, whether it's used to train or I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of potentials that aren't even being like talked about.
I mean, there is, there was a similar discussion that happened with Xerox machines when they came in, right? Or like just any kind of record. Like every Xerox machine, if you buy one, you pay some kind of art tax. You could also kind of like take off a certain percentage of, and to every library and every kind of like person who's enrolled in some royalty kind of organizing distributing company wouldn't be that hard. But I mean, that would be I think.
Yeah, I mean, this was in response to this early discussion on the media formats and that, but I think it's also related to copyright. So the, what John called the transparency paradox, that's kind of in this whole accountability discussion, a very prevalent thing that always comes up. And I was reminded of, C-SPAN, for example, with this idea that, you just broadcast all those debates and it makes democracy better because you can verify what your representative is actually saying. And as we all know, it generated this extreme polarization. So it had exactly the opposite effect on democracy. So, and there's always this idea, if you put information out in the open, if you let everyone see everything, you have a positive effect, and usually backfires very severely.
I mean, it's like every dictator was super transparent. I mean, like they told us, I will kill you, and then they killed you. And that's not helping, highly overrated.
It was interesting actually when the Meta AI policy folks were talking. They said to us and to our class that the first label that Meta had on Instagram and Facebook, which was something like AI, not generated, but there was another term. It's like AI info now. It's what right. But guess who the community that complained the most about the AI labels early on was the creator community, right? Because they are making money off of an authentic brand, an authentic personality, or stuff that like they don't want people to think is sus, right? As soon as it has an AI label, it's sus, right? And then it's diminished in its potential economic value. So the creative community was actually one of the first ones to complain, and then, you know, so they've hit on this point of AI info, but you know, all of these feeds have these problems, which you would call like context collapse or container collapse. Like we're just seeing stuff without, you know, proper orienting information or categories or attributions, and it's you know, if you just landed on planet Earth right now, you would think this was an extremely bizarre situation, right? Because we've just decided as a society to just adopt this this information context where just nothing has any context or container around it.
And there's so much information.
Right.
It's just-
Yeah, it's, I mean, if you have children and you sort of watch over their shoulder, you're like, it's just such a banana zoo of things that are juxtaposed, but.
Yeah, I have
Old
a
guy
question
talking, yeah.
actually, which is, I guess, I mean, we've been very focused on the like AI generated content,
Mhm.
but the current context is that, you know, figures of authority that we would normally go to for truthful statements are circulating, you know, untruthful statements. So it's kind of like a
Right.
2 + 2 = 5
Yeah.
situation. And those are real videos of people that we would normally trust. And then that feeds into
Yeah,
this. So
yes.
that just is kind of mind boggling.
Yeah, it really is. I keep thinking of Trump and saying, you are fake news, and
Yeah.
this becomes a way of weaponizing, saying that something isn't truth, when in fact it really is, and getting people to question what is true based on
Yeah.
maybe what someone in a position of power doesn't want people to think about or know about.
There's been artists that have created like extra fingers that you can wear. So if you're committing a crime and they have video, yeah, you have plausible deniability. And so yeah, I think it goes both ways.
That's
I'm totally gonna be on the lookout for that. In case you're looking
Good
for
Halloween costume.
Yeah. It's really good.
It's just to Laura's point about trust and authority. I mean, if you look at the general social survey, which is sort of like our longest, best gold standard data of recent decades, the decline in trust in institutions, which, you know, chief among them is the press and sort of like media, but whether it's scientific institutions or Congress or whatever, it has been declining. But prior to the internet, it's probably accelerated by social media, and probably even further by Gen AI. But like, there's something very deep going on in modern societies, and the technologies, I think, are exacerbating it and maybe taking it to totally different levels. But there's something, you're right, there's a political, economic, social context in which we also have to account for. And I don't know, I think they say that like a big chunk of the variance in all of this is explained by political elites criticizing institutions. And so you think of like the Nixon presidency, the Trump presidency, but also even the Clinton presidency. I mean, they really went after the press over and over again. And that also spilled into, you know, negative perceptions of Congress. And Dan, I don't know how the courts are doing these days, but
Not so well.
Yeah, I suspect they're.
If you haven't noticed, at least the Supreme Court's not doing too well.
Anyway, go ahead.
I think there's something about like that, like data overflow, that we have so much data, so many data, and like increasingly individualized kind of data and realities that also explains maybe why misinformation, which is often a rumor, is so popular, because a rumor is, I think, privileged information. It's kind of like the illusion of like, I get something before everybody else. So I have something in an ocean of like whateverness that is really precious, that is really enormous. So I really want to hold on to it because it gives me like a moment of the illusion of knowing. Yeah. Even so, I know it's not true. Yeah, or most likely not true. But it's like also like cybernetics. You call like one of your project like that Psi. I meant to ask you, what is it standing for?
Well, the allusion, of course, is to Cambridge Analytica.
Yeah.
But, cybernetica is, I think, a clear connection to that. But of course, it's a cybernetic system that's producing disinformation. It's not just our weaponized, LLM, but this is also the socio-technical system of social media and
Yeah.
how that circulates and is disseminated.
Yeah.
So that context is just as important to the project, even though we would never put our disinformation online and it is, air gapped in galleries and public spaces, but just getting people to kind of think of that context as an important part of that equation.
The history of psyops.
Yeah.
We could start with, I don't know, Edward Bernays or someone like that,
Yeah.
and think about those propaganda campaigns.
Yes.
that happened.
Edward Bernays, who was the double nephew of Sigmund Freud, right?
That's right.
I think he was really like protecting democracy, kind of
That's how he saw it.
how it
Yeah.
started, that he wanted to warn and was shocked when he learned that government had it on his nightstand. Yeah. But speaking of which, in 5 to 10 years, how in the best case scenario, how do we solve the problem? It doesn't need to be utopian, but realistic. What do you think? What would be the best case scenario we can hope for?
I have two components to that equation that I've already kind of mentioned. One is really focusing on literacy so that people can individually be empowered to make decisions, especially knowing that people are going to either distrust certain authority figures or, people are going to have different epistemological foundations. If they can find a way to really connect with truth, I'm going to use that word, and have a critical orientation to it, I think that would be ideal. And I still really think that we have to change the targeted advertising business model. I do not think that we can move forward with any of these other solutions. They're more like Band-Aids when, people are led into filter bubbles in order to keep their eyes and keep their attention.
Yeah.
For
Totally.
profit. So-
Attention is a commodity, it's the commodity. I think that's a good point.
I think thinking about what you were saying and John was saying, I think maybe the younger generation, and I don't know what the solution will be, but will just start to reject a lot of the content that they're receiving or at least be very suspicious of it. And there won't be exactly a return to postmodernism, but something like that will emerge where a type of skepticism will become in fashion. And or maybe you just don't need to decide if something's true or not. Like you can just leave things as like, we don't need to know everything. And I'll focus on the things that are actually important to me. And I think that's actually one of the problems we're having now is the world is so complex and there's so many different moving parts that people as like a member of the voting public are expected to have some say on, or at least enough knowledge on it to elect people that know something about it. And it's overwhelming. It's difficult for academics. That's what their job is to do. I can only imagine just
I have a follow-up. If it's true that the future generations kind of I don't need to know the truth. That's then what do we do with academia that is journalism, law, science, that is based on truth and factuality?
it becomes about
What's the
methods.
future then in
Yes,
academia?
I agree with this. I think it's really about being able to realize that the methods that you use to understand the world shape your understanding of the world.
Yeah.
And if people can understand that, I think they can have a lot more understanding of different disciplines, different echo chambers.
Yeah.
So I think
Under-
this anarchistic approach to methodology is actually really relevant.
It becomes under what conditions is this being true or not relevant? And then if it is relevant, then it becomes about what are the methods to decide what matters and what doesn't to get to a place where you can make a decision. So it's not even about knowing if something is absolutely true or not. It's just about how do I react in the face of this information.
I think what's really exciting about coming to that point in the conversation is that art and design in particular, in my experience of them, are fields and areas of practice that allow you to constantly experiment with new methods. So it's I've come to think about it as never doing the same thing twice. Whereas I'm a trained social scientist, I would say, I'm a qualitative researcher, I'm gonna do interviews for the rest of my life and maybe collaborate with someone that does something else. But it's amazing that art and design is a training for that. Yeah.
I had a quick question. I'm Vedant, pursuing my master's in EIS. So, as you mentioned, like the labeling is ongoing in different social media platforms. Like, couldn't that labeling be biased? Like, there are models used in the backend, can be biased, and it can be used as a weapon for information. Question, like, can we build a non-biased model that can?
Well, one of the biggest experiments right now with labeling is the ability to use, to invoke the Grok fact checking mechanism on X, right? Which is people are just doing all the time. It's essentially a label, right? It's like Grok, what is this true? And then Grok.
It's like predictive analytics.
Yeah, it yields a verdict, and I mean, it's a fascinating social experiment. As somebody who's sort of watched the labeling strategies evolve. I mean, remember too that labels can be not just fact checking in orientation or corrective in orientation. They can also just be informational, right? You can label, you can say this may or may not be true, but go to the this particular source to find out more. And so I think there's like lots of different ways to get around this question of like who is the absolute arbiter of truth, which is, you're totally right. I mean, it's like it's a rabbit hole, and it's a very difficult thing to assess, especially in a really politically polarized environment. I will, but to your question about like where should we go? I mean, it's worth noting that around the world, people are adopting different models, right? So the Chinese have this idea of cyber sovereignty, which is, we are going to do all content and media activity in relation to the state and the state ministries, and they will control that. Ditto with Iran, increasingly Turkey. India and Brazil are going different directions. And then all of Europe, however many countries are in Europe, the EU, 30 countries or 29 or whatever it is, are adopting a model under the Digital Services Act, which is, has a kind of pathway for citizens to report disinformation, hate speech, and other varieties, and there's accountability, and there's so the United States is doing one thing, but there are lots of other models. And look at the British just put something in place called the Online Safety Act, which is very interesting. Requires age verification for a lot of platforms, like has lots of penalties, civil, criminal penalties. So I mean, there's a lot we could do in the United States, and there's a lot everybody else is doing. But part of my argument is like the United States is just sitting on the sideline at this point. So I think we should interact.
I was going to ask you going at that. Do you think there's any ways we can hold companies like Meta accountable, or like in what ways is that possible? Because of like the model they've created, they're trying to keep people's attention, which has obviously contributed to short form content and in turn like disinformation.
I mean, it just
You're more on the inside, so maybe you'd have some more insights.
I think doing great provocative art like really pushes the boundaries. Actually.
Can I just modify the question a little bit, because I mean we're always focusing on the companies because they have the money, so we can sue them. But I would like also the user to be, apart from the economic side effects, like as an ethical question, who is responsible? The companies and everybody else.
Right, the developer is also, responsible for putting technology out there. Companies are quickly putting technology out there in order to be the first to do that. There's responsibility with, how quickly you actually put something out into the public. There's so many, I think, levels of responsibility. The public, when they're, reacting and sharing things, are also responsible for disseminating disinformation. But I think it's such a good question. And I would love to hear if anyone has thoughts about, how to hold powerful groups like Meta accountable. What would be, maybe there's some regulatory ways that we
imagine that. You have to go legislate, I mean, still, at least ostensibly.
I would say that consciousness is going to be extremely important. That sounds very abstract. my earlier point about sort of how younger people are seeing this, I think it's worth remembering that 20 years ago, when social media really became part of our culture, it was a youth-driven technology. It was a real, it was really a bottom-up, youth-driven phenomenon. I don't think AI is a youth-driven phenomenon. I think your generation, you push back, please, is being imposed by the likes of Sam Altman, Dario Amodei, and all the rest. We like Dario because we have an enterprise agreement with Anthropic. But anyway, but seriously, I think that's meaningful, and I think the consumer consciousness is, is going to be important, because if you read those platforms for even a day in a mass way, there will be like lots of product people and engineers like all of a sudden like, whoa, what are we doing? And I think that may be the place where the metas of the world need to like hear something loud and clear about what people want and expect.
And there are court cases that are in process. I don't know if you look into what's going on with character AI. There was a young boy who was told to kill himself by an AI generated character, and that's currently working its way through the courts. And it's sort of, where does liability fall in this? And it's an open-ended question. But I do think no matter which way that case goes, it's conceivable that a decade or so from now, just like you can't make toys that children can choke on, or cigarette companies were eventually held responsible for the product they were creating, that you could see the tide shift, and these companies would be held. There'd be like massive class action lawsuits against them for all sorts of losses that people could.
I do have a follow-up question to that, since we have a legal expert in the room. So, if we approach these things from a, human versus technology question, like where does the responsibility or liability lie? Ultimately, I guess we have to come down on one or the other side, but a lot of the, theoretical models we're trying to think about are much more about human, co-evolving or mutual shaping of technologies in human life, right? And so thus, and I love the example, I think it comes up in an article by Lucy Suchman. Yeah, I think by Lucy Suchman referring to, I think, Bruno Latour, saying something like, it's not that guns kill people or people kill people, it's that people are different with guns in their hand, which is a very much more entangled understanding of what that means. And so then we have these things out there like, well, we should collaborate with AI, or, AI is taking our jobs, or like, so every media framing of the human relationship with AI is deciding what, if these are kind of binary categories, or what exactly is going on. So I don't know, I would love to just throw that out there for anyone, but also because
So, the thing that's sticking in my head is, really proud of your question on how to hold tech companies liable is, there's a notion in law called strict liability. So typically when you've got an injury case, and the case that the suicide case, one of the aspects there is causation, right? What caused the boy to commit suicide? Was it the tech tool? Was it something else? Was it mental health? So typically you have to prove that something caused the injury. And strict liability, which has to be imposed typically by a law that's passed by a legislature, you don't have to prove causation. You simply have to say, the person was using AI and did this, and therefore the AI company is strictly liable. And there was a flood of strict liability legislation in the early part of the 20th century as the Industrial Revolution brought lots of these new tools and gadgets that were inherently dangerous into our lives. And I think that strict liability is a thing that we should be taking a look at whether it relates to AI, but I'm a little bit of an absolutist.
Also toxic waste and all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So the toxic dump, super fun, that kind of stuff is also strict liability.
There's a computer scientist, Laura Edelson, who's a colleague of mine, and or all of us, over in Curry. And Laura has a theory. She's an extremely powerful thinker. If you don't know her work, you should. And her theory is that we should try to isolate all the elements of the big platforms that are products. And so she and I have argued a bit because my book is really about content moderation, and she thinks it's a fool's errand because you're the thought police or you're, you know, you run into censorship concerns. But she says if you think about it all as product, we have a better chance at regulation. And she says, and the real hook is that there are patents for a lot of these products. The companies have a, you know, I don't know if it's a feed algorithm product or, you know, different kinds of buttons and features and functionality that theoretically, because they have patents tied to them, could be regulated as products and could have product liability associated with them. So Laura and a whole bunch of other people are trying to pursue that path, which I think is really promising. And I just wanted to put it out there as a.
You could pull patent protection, but if you if there's enough harm caused, you could actually withdraw the patent. You know, you could.
Yeah. I'm happy to connect you with Laura if you're interested. We can kind of raise this because, yeah, Edelson, EDELSON.
We have 3 minutes left. So if you have something to say that must be heard, this is the moment.
There has been a new chat question.
Oh, no, please.
Regarding bottom-up movements like social media versus corporate down, like the current AI rate, can you address the issue of blockchain? Their knowledge of blockchain is limited, so they want to know if blockchain tech can be incorporated into AI models to give us more shared agency.
Well, I mean, my understanding of the C2PA is that is based on blockchain. And again, one of the problems with content provenance is that you can hack it. It's not completely safe in that sense. So, you know, from my perspective, that would be a concern, another technological solution that could lead to people having a false sense of security. I don't know if people want to add other dimensions or dissent from my position.
I mean, I'm wondering what you would use it for. You think of like cryptocurrencies, you have a transaction record for everything it is used for, but you can still buy like guns or hitmen with it.
Right, because it does have the anonymization component to it, which can be helpful.
Yeah, and it can be stolen. People can still hack your Bitcoin wallet. Even though the cryptocurrency itself is secure, it can still be taken and modified.
Yeah, there might be some potential there. I guess I haven't really thought about how that could be used in an activist approach in this context.
I do think for anyone worried about the environmental impact of implementing a blockchain in every image that circulates, that's going to have an enormous impact on the amount of energy used.
Yes.
One problem.
Another problem,
Yeah.
That's a great topic for another. And on that note, thanks everyone for coming. And yeah, it's a conversation. Thank you.